Okay.
All right.
All right. So Holly and I decided for our discussion this week we're going to use the first article, a narrative research study, living in the space between participant and researcher as a narrative inquirer, examining the ethnic identity of Chinese Canadian students as conflicting stories to live by Elaine Chan. And I'm going to use grounded theory for my portion of how to turn this study into something different. And Holly is going to talk about.
Phenomenology, which I have been practicing pronouncing for the last several days. And I also learned this week that it has nothing to do with phonemes, which is what we talk about all the time when we're talking about teaching kids to read. So I am definitely a smarter person now that I know about phenomenology. So that is what I will talk about when it's my turn.
Okay. So I did feel like this study in particular was the type of study that could be easily adapted to other types of studies, in part because the researcher was embedded in the classroom for a long period of time. So she had a lot of interaction with the student that she chose to interview, I May, as well as other students. And in her description of the school, she mentions that the school is diverse. So I felt like in choosing this study, it was the type of study that could be easily adapted to multiple other types of studies just by the positioning of the researcher. So she had ample opportunities to pull from other students who were in a same or similar boat as I May, as well as students who were not experiencing what I May and some of the other international students were experiencing. So she had a ready-made pool of both types of students there, as well as the instructor that she was working with in the homeroom classroom. So I did feel like it was one of those types of studies that could be turned into other types of studies fairly easily. Um, I was drawn to grounded theory because as a scientist, I've always believed that that's really important, right? Is to not go into your study with a preconceived notion of what you're going to find. And we've talked about that a lot in our study so far of qualitative research about removing the researcher from the equation, about for example, bracketing and making sure you understand where you're coming from as the researcher. And I feel like grounded theory is really all about not going into this with any idea of what you're going to find. So going into this, collecting the data, letting the data speak for itself. So the way that this study could have been turned into a grounded theory study is if she had gone in and just had all these extensive conversations with the students in that homeroom, with the instructor, and then let that data guide her theory. So let that data help her come up with what she was looking for or what she thought what she was trying to find, right? How do these students interact with each other? How are they navigating being immigrants? I feel like that could have been a switch that could have happened fairly easily.
Yeah, I actually think that the phenomenology is a cousin to that. Um, when you look at, I have always have like wonderings as much as I have ideas, right? So my wondering was like COVID like when we talk about using phenomenology to study COVID,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everybody experienced COVID. That was a kind of, a shared phenomenon. So I think that phenomenology works in the sense of if you were to branch this out to lots of students who have experienced the same phenomenon, which is I am in a school that is operating on different cultural norms than my home. So I wonder if that phenomenon is common enough. But like you said, in this study, there was access in the school to a lot of students who were experiencing that. So branching out and looking at how all of them experience that phenomenon would be, I think could have been helpful. Or if you wanted to stay with that Chinese American theme, you could have just sought out students from that particular culture. One thing that I think I'm figuring out about me as I go through this is I'm making things just like this. And I
Mm-hmm.
think as I'm just learning how to do this, I need to make it much smaller and more manageable. So, and I also think bias, like I think about bias, like I have to acknowledge I had a tremendous amount of experience with people in from Chinese culture when I worked on the Chinese immersion program, primarily teachers who were living within their cultural norms in China in their own homes, but coming in and teaching in a school that was very different. And then we also had some students who were Chinese who came in and almost did like reverse immersion. So I was thinking about them and thinking, okay, when you're thinking about this, make sure and you're thinking of how to reconstruct this,
Mhm.
don't bring those biases into what you're doing. But I think that by studying more people who have experienced that phenomenon, you could account for things like cultural differences.
Mhm.
How much of what was discovered in this interview was just unique to this person or just unique to this person's culture. And if you looked at different people from different cultures who'd experienced the same phenomenon, I think you would have very different results and a different understanding of the process.
I did wonder about that because in the study, she talks about there was another student who was from the same province as
Mhm.
IMA, but who, shifted 2 years earlier. And she didn't really, I was surprised because I thought that the author might have looked at the experience of that other student, and how did that student, having already been there for 2 years and already assimilated, looking at the interplay more between the two students because they were from the exact same province and presumably had some of the same experiences. She did talk a little bit about that other student and how
Yeah.
she interacted with IMA, but I thought that would have made a really interesting study, looking at someone who had already experienced this and now, how does that work with this new student who's coming in and they're both from the same small province in China.
I don't know that I'm going to find it quick enough, but I'm scanning through because I'm thinking, okay, so if this researcher was in this school with
Mhm,
access to all of these different
mhm.
children, why this child? And I'm trying to scan
Oh,
through and see if she, I don't remember it from reading it, but
she
why
did say, but it was
why
really
this child?
brief.
There was what?
She did say why, and it was very, very, very brief.
I don't know. We're gonna find it. I don't know. I don't know that. I mean,
Yeah.
talking there about the limited body of research about students and their school experiences, but then why this particular child? I don't know. I don't know if we're gonna find it, and I don't even know that it really. Oh, here it says I first met Aimee when I began observations in her
Yep.
seventh grade class. Let's see if that explains it. I think just she just it sounds like she was in there doing some research for something different, and this particular child just captured her attention for one reason or another.
That
Um,
is basically, if I remember correctly, about the gist of it was that she just seemed
yeah.
like the student was willing to
Mhm.
talk to her and share her experiences and
Yeah, yeah. And I do get that this researcher said there isn't a lot out there along this vein, and I am contributing to that body of knowledge versus being the be all end all solution to the problem, or if there's really even a problem to solve, because I don't know if it was a problem so much as it was just an exploration.
yeah.
Um, but I came away from it thinking, if you did a phenomenology, then you could have included students from different cultures, because possibly students, in this country, especially where you and I are, we're seeing mostly students from Hispanic families. Um, Although in Grand Rapids, there are a growing number of immigrants from all over. The Kentwood Public Schools would be a fantastic place to study something like this in more detail. I feel like it would be the same thing, but
It's funny because you talk about like your history and your experiences, and as a chemist, as a person who's done a lot of work with data, that's I think what drove me the most nuts about this study was that you had access to all of these students, who had similar or dissimilar, or we don't know, right? You had access to all of these students that you could have pulled information from about how they navigated this situation, and you chose just one. And I'm like, I I I understand the theory behind why you do that, but the scientist in
Mhm.
me is like, but
Yeah,
but you could have had the experiences of multiple students. You could have had
yeah.
the experiences of students who were not immigrants, but how were their experiences changed by interacting with people from
Mhm.
different cultures, because the school itself was so diverse. Like, how did that impact the students who were not who were just Canadians? It just there was such a wealth of information she could have drawn in. And like you, I'm this big picture kind of person, and she just took this tiny, tiny little slice of information, and I
Right.
want more. I want to know about the other students in the school.
Yeah, and I think that would have been easy, again, through either grounded research or through phenomenology, maybe even through case study, although we're not gonna go into that one, but
Yeah.
to be able to just look at I think that if the researcher's goal was to contribute to the thinking around this,
Hmm.
there could have been a larger contribution through a different type of
Yeah.
study. So this did contribute, certainly. But then I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about, yeah, but the other study that I've become super familiar with is from the guy who is going to be my dissertation chair.
Hmm.
I showed you guys, it's in a giant book. So he studied one university in Grand Rapids, Cornerstone University, which is
Hmm.
a religious private institution that was failing and turned itself around. It
So
was
did was it a case study, Holly?
it was I don't know what he called it, an I
Oh,
don't
an
have this. Oh, wait,
ethnography?
right here. It is an ethnographic case
Okay.
study, correct. And so when I read it the first time and I thought, okay, all right, like you spent a ton of time in this one place. What about other places? But then now that he's 20 years out from having done that, it really did contribute to his understanding of why institutions succeed or fail to have dug in so deep in this one place. So perhaps that's a piece of it too. Maybe this is sort of these sort of are stepping stones, right?
Mhm.
They're not meant to be ends in and of themselves, but I don't
I
know.
do think that there are themes, so I'm a person that's worked at multiple institutions of higher education, and I've seen the ways in which they're very, very different when you go from institution to institution, but also the ways in which they're very, very much the same. And you're right, like you can draw broad themes, even though it might at first, when you get to a new institution, you might think, wow, this is so different in the way that they do things. But then kind of when you pull back and look at it from the long view, you see that there
Yeah,
are these really
yeah.
broad themes at each institution in how they handle things. So you're right,
Mhm.
maybe that zoomed in view might actually help somebody else, even though on the surface they look very different.
Yeah, and in the moment it looks like, oh, I don't want to say wasted time because that's not fair to the
Yeah.
person who that's not honoring the work of the person who did it. But while it might look like a very narrow focus given the time that had to be put into it, perhaps the go slow to go fast idea.
Mhm.
It might that breadth of knowledge or that depth of knowledge might allow then for a deeper understanding of similar situations as you're kind of going on.
So have you thought at all about what type of study you want to do for your dissertation and your research? Are you still exploring?
Think I'm smart enough yet. I think that I need to take the summer class that we have this
Yeah.
summer. I mean, we've talked and you and I've talked enough about like I think I've settled in on teaching and learning and
Mhm.
but exactly what? I mean, I've been throwing around in my head since we met last week about, oh, what if I did look at the dual enrollment? Like that was not a bad idea. Um I need to do a literature review and that's the number one thing that I am finding to be challenging is finding the time, but also the
Mhm.
motivation to dig into I have the resources. I just have to dig in and see what's already out there because I think that it's an issue of teacher quality contributing to some of these issues with student
Mhm.
success. I don't know. And I think I'm looking at something like this and I've got to
Yeah.
narrow it down. I
Oh,
just
I'm
have to.
with you. When I do my literature search, because what I've basically been doing is this class has really forced me, just the way that it's set up with the three different assignments every week has really
Yeah.
forced me to be very organized about how I approach this class versus some of the other ones that we've taken in the past. So what I've been doing is setting aside 2 hours each night, Monday through Friday, from 6 to 8 p.m. and whatever I have left over. So I've been trying to pick
Yeah.
like half an hour just to read one study each night. But you're right, my problem is the same thing. Like my topic is like here, right? And real to do a good job, right? Like I need to somehow get it to here.
Well, and I keep reading over and over again in this book, too, about beginning researchers, a beginning
Mhm.
researcher this, and I keep thinking, you have to remember that I am at least a beginning researcher. So when I structure this, the intention is that this is my beginning of doing this.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna have to be, I don't know, I think that like people are kind of put in your path for a reason, and I think connecting with this dissertation chair for me early
Mhm.
is really helpful because he just knows everything about everything and
I think
he
that's
just
what I'm
listens.
worried about. Like, I've been really hesitant to pick somebody because I feel like since I don't know my exact topic yet, and I don't know like
Yeah,
exactly
no.
how I want to do it, that I'm afraid to reach out to somebody and say, "Hey, would you consider being my chair?" But no, I don't know exactly what I want to study yet. And I don't know exactly how I want to study
No,
it.
he's been very, I meet with him again this week. He's very, very patient with me and he just kind
Really?
of listens. We really spend just like an hour together once a month and I'll have a
Okay.
lot to talk about this time because up to now I've been a little bit like I just bot fly from thing to thing and he just listens and
And he's okay with that?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he is. But I picked him on purpose because I know he was the dean of arts and humanities, I think, at Mount Calm for years before he
Okay.
retired. And I know he's helped other students through this process.
Hmm.
He's just a people person. I mean, I don't know what he's going to say to me if I decide after summer that I want to do a quantitative study. I'm not sure that he's going to agree that's a good idea because he's just, yeah, I mean, he
Maybe
digs
a
into
mixed
topics.
methods study, because that's kind of what I've been thinking. I'm such a data person and a science person, and it's really hard for me to imagine getting away from that. But he also recognized that the topic I want to study is really all about culture, and culture is really hard to quantify, right? So how do if you're
Yeah,
looking at culture and you're looking at why human beings choose to
yeah,
do or not do certain things, quantitative is probably not really the best method to answer that question. So,
yeah.
maybe,
I think what I'm leaning toward is to use quantitative data to identify community colleges who are bucking the trend in terms of student success.
okay.
So if this is in, and it doesn't even have to be just in Michigan, because I have thought about, wouldn't it be lovely to identify one out near where our friends live in California and be able to keep going out there, but
I
find
actually
one.
have an idea for you, if you're
Yeah,
wondering.
okay.
You know that I started at Georgia Highlands College. Do you
Mhm.
know they were a top 25 Aspen finalist?
Oh, okay. I did not. So I want to
Here I
find
left.
those
Yep.
community colleges that are experiencing high levels of student success. And that's where I think I want to go and figure out why. And I don't think I'm going to be able to come to an end. Like,
Yeah.
I think what I want to be true is that when I study this, those students are, so my dissertation may actually be more about student success than it may be about teacher efficacy. But
Okay.
I want to know if I feel like there should be I feel like where there's good teachers, there should be more student success, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe students at the college level, maybe that isn't as important as I think it is. Because I just keep
Yeah.
railing against this whole idea that we are
I
putting
think
people in
that
these classrooms, no
if you want
training.
like my opinion, I think that it's a
Mhm.
mixed bag. I think that you're
Yeah.
going to have some students that are going to be successful no matter who's teaching them because they
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
that drive and that desire and they're going to find a way. You have
Mhm.
some students who are not in the right place to be successful
Yeah.
no matter
Right.
who's teaching them, and maybe that's
Mhm.
because of their background before they got here. Maybe that's because of their financial situation.
Mhm.
Maybe that's because of their home life situation, that you have
Mhm.
some students who it doesn't matter how good the instructor is, they're just not in the right place.
Yeah, and I agree
Uh,
with that for sure.
and then you've
Yeah.
got the ones in the middle, which is where I feel like you can actually make the influence, right? The ones
Right.
that are in the right place, but not as strong as the ones that are going to succeed no matter what. It's those ones in the middle where, as an instructor, I feel
Mhm.
like you have the most opportunity to make the difference. They're
Yeah.
ready, they're there, but
Yeah.
they need that extra whatever
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
get them going.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm anxious to see Gary this week and see now that I have done some of this classwork to see um because he keeps pushing me about narrowing it down to relationships in online courses.
Okay.
Like if you buy into the theory that it's harder to build relationships with students that in online courses because we have it in our department Ferris main campus. I don't want to study that though because it's a 4 year, but I think you could
Right.
find something similar. So we have main campus students come in person to the majority of their classes.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have out state, the rest of the state, we have these statewide programs where they're in online for everything. And there are marked discrepancies in student achievement between those two groups, even though they have the same faculty. So the same faculty that teach EDLA 461
Mhm.
on Tuesday and Thursday mornings are teaching EDLA 461 on Wednesday night. The grades, the achievement, the success out in the field, it's very different between the two groups.
That
And
might
I
be really interesting to study, Holly, particularly because you're now a student in a program that is primarily online.
right, right. But
We
I'm
do
just
have that face-to-face piece every 7 weeks or
yeah,
so, but that might be an interesting because now you have the perspective of a student, right? You have the perspective of being
right.
a student in an
Mhm.
online program, as well as you have the perspective of being an instructor. So now you kind
Yeah,
of see, and I know that you don't want to infuse your own bias into it, but it might
yeah.
be really interesting to do that study, knowing that you can see both sides.
Well, and that I have ready access to the students because there's this little niggling part of me that says, but the profile of a student on main campus is very different
Yeah.
than the profile of a student in our out. Most of our students outstate, they're working. Many of
Hmm.
them are raising families. They're just in a they're already at risk coming in a different way than the students on main campus.
Yeah.
So I'm just not sure. I'm not sure, and that's where I think mixed methods may be helpful.
Yeah.
But I'm not opposed to studying my own students and my own at my own institution. Um,
One of my friends, when I was at Georgia Highlands, he was biology. And he didn't publish it or anything, but we were struggling with student success, particularly in our anatomy and physiology courses, which
mhm.
we offered like 80% of our sections were offered online because that's what
Mhm,
students wanted, particularly those looking to get into nursing and dental hygiene. So online sections would fill up, face-to-face sections just really lagged in enrollment. But in looking at we had this really great Navigate dashboard that allowed us to pull all sorts of data about our
mhm,
classes.
mhm,
And in looking at our online sections, we could see that those students were not doing as well. They wanted the online courses, but you're right, like the outcomes, they were not doing as well. And so he took on a section of A and P himself for a couple of semesters in a row and tried tinkering with different things to find out what worked. And in the end, what he landed on was a really small change, but it vastly improved the all of the metrics of success for those students. He
mhm,
put a weekly video on the homepage. Sometimes it was only a 5 and not a lecture video, but a weekly check-in video. Hey, it's your instructor checking in to see how you're doing. Don't forget this is due. Don't forget that's due. Just a short 5 minute, and the face. It was seeing his face that personalized him to the students, and he improved the DFW rates and all the metrics. I mean,
mhm.
it didn't become perfect, obviously, but he
Yeah.
showed statistically significant improvement in all of our markers just by adding a 5 minute welcome video every week.
Well, don't you feel a difference in this class we're in now
Yeah.
that we have that video at the beginning of the week
Yeah.
and that we have the opportunity to connect in person with the
Yeah.
instructor every
Yeah.
week? That I
And
feel far more connected to this class than I have other ones that we've taken.
well, in this format, what we're doing right now is so much more natural and flows so much better than typing a discussion board post every week. We've been in classes where it felt like the instructor kind of stifled interaction between us because of the way that they insisted their responses be worded. Like you
Mhm.
couldn't like I can remember, answering a question of somebody and getting dinged because I didn't have a citation on a
Oh,
response,
yeah.
which was
Yeah.
literally just an answer to a question that somebody posed me. And I was like,
Mhm.
really? So even just this feels so much more. You're right. I feel more connected to you. I did one with Alicia and Tony,
Yeah.
Juan,
Mhm.
you're right. It does. It feels more real.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Next week, Leon,
I
I'm
know.
interested to do that. Yeah. And maybe Kristen will hop in too. So, but yeah, so I don't know, that's an interesting to me. There you've got two groups where I think you could use mixed methods. So you could
Yeah.
do an analysis of a lot of things about them.
Yeah.
And then you could approach it in a qualitative way where you actually dig in with them. So, okay, the numbers show this about you guys. Not the, but I'm going to dig in and talk to you and find out, we're making a small tweak just because I think it might work, of so our students who are taking, we call them our 419 classes. So it's math, science, socializing, and ELA methods, and it's 12
Mhm.
credits. And then they have 4 credits of field attached to that. That's their whole semester.
Wow.
And if they're on main campus, then they're in class together every Tuesday and every Thursday.
Okay.
And I run downstairs and see them all the time.
Mhm.
Um, and they see their instructors every Tuesday and Thursday. For our students in the program that's online, they never have that. So
Oh.
what we're gonna and in on main campus, we bring the schools right to them the first week, and the schools bring all this stuff to welcome them to their field placements, and we don't do any of that. So we're actually going to require that the first week of their field placement in the fall, the students in the outstate program
Mhm.
are going to have to come to the hub that's closest to their location. So that means for me, I'll do a session in Grand Rapids on a Monday and a session in Kalamazoo or Dowagiac on a Tuesday, and we're going to bring them together from like 10 to 2 in person, like what we do for DCCL. Let them get to know each other, give them some Ferris swag, let them talk to us in person. We're going to bring their advisor, and I'm really
Me
curious
too.
what
Me
that
too.
is going to do
Yeah.
to their feelings of connectedness
Oh,
and
yes.
their achievement in the classes, compared to just being in their house on a computer all the time.
That is so interesting because now you've got me like I'm really curious to see, you're gonna have to get back to me in like a couple semesters and tell me what happened.
Yes. And I am a primary investigator on a co-primary investigator on a research study about field placement at our institution, but I have no clue what we're actually doing right now. So I said to our faculty member asked me to do it with her, and I'm like, okay. And so she put it through IRB, and now it's going through this process, and I'm doing the city stuff because I have to do that in order to do it
Mhm.
with her. And I wake up in the night and I go, why did you say you would do this? You have no clue what you're doing. And so I don't know yeah. So I think that will be a good exercise for me too, prior to
Yeah.
doing my dissertation on my own.
I was gonna say it's a practice run, right?
I think so. But,
Awesome.
all right. Do you think we're good? Should we stop recording?
Yeah, I think the instructor is probably like, well, they never stop talking.
Well, and I don't, she doesn't have to, I think like I'm happy. You want me to turn it in this week? Because I think you and Juan have been doing a pretty good job.
It's up to you. It's up to you. If you could turn it in, I made a recording too, just in case something happens. Now, I don't
Okay.
know about you.
Well,
I don't know if you, so I'm gonna hit stop recording so she doesn't have to
yeah, I
listen to
just
this
already
part.
did.